The opinions expressed by the host and guests in this show are not necessarily the views of Children's Health Defense.
Good morning, America. Good morning, world. Good morning, CHD. Welcome. Once again, my name is Michael Kane. I am the Director of Advocacy at Children's Health Defense. Today, we're going to be dissecting a propaganda hit piece against RFK. Unvax mom deceived, used to smear RFK Jr. We're going to have Mariana Slaughter on to discuss this, as well as Tia Severino. They are both from Georgia. They are both activists involved in the homeschool community, involved in the autism community. And then after that, the legendary Meryl Nass is coming on to discuss some wonderful bills from Representative Massie. So you have a fantastic hour-ish of CHD TV. Make sure you stay here for the whole thing. I'm actually really excited about this. This Tragedy in Paradise piece is a straight-up propaganda hit piece on RFK, and Mariana was duped into being a pawn in it. And we are going to break that down because this piece is going to be shown at Emory College in November with Peter Marks in attendance there. Here it is, an Atlanta News first event, Rebuilding Vaccine Confidence. Oh my God. This is, I'm actually shocked they're leading with this type of propaganda for rebuilding confidence. We're going to want as many Georgians and those in the surrounding area to register to go to this event peacefully, respectfully. Submit your questions. Anyway, we got all of that. We got actions. We got actions today for people. So stick around for that. We're going to need your help in this. But first, as always, we're going to do some news headlines. Cheryl Hines. I had the pleasure a few years back meeting Cheryl Hines in New Hampshire when Bobby Kennedy teased his run for president for the very first time publicly. She was a lovely woman. I was very excited to see her with Bobby, standing with him as he was starting to do that. Ever since then, man, I'm just more and more and more impressed with Miss Hines. She is doing some great work. We got a couple of clips. Let's show her on Megyn Kelly.
I was at Fox. If you said anything about the vaccine schedule for kids, you get a call immediately to stop talking about that.
Yeah.
And, you know, Pfizer was one of our big advertisers. Right. I was young and didn't really put it together.
Right.
But it is crazy. Like, there are certain things you're not allowed to talk about.
You can't talk about it.
And he was like, a third rail? Let me love it. Right. Let me hold it. And you're over there like,
I'm like, Bobby, everybody, you're like making people go crazy.
Right. And that's how she felt 10 years ago. Like, oh my God, everyone's going crazy. Look at her on The View just last week. Let's show this clip.
You say that they are pro-vaccine. It seems as though Bobby and Trump are casting doubt on the efficacy of the vaccine, which makes Americans very nervous. So that's the problem that we're having.
Okay, yeah. I understand. Yeah. I understand that. And it's interesting because, I don't know if you saw, 60 Minutes just did a piece about the vaccine injury compensation program.
Yeah.
So people that have had vaccine injuries can be compensated if they can prove it, and they have paid out $5.4 billion for vaccine injuries. So my question is, can we do better?
Is that all vaccines or just the COVID vaccine?
It's all vaccines.
It's all vaccines.
As far as I know.
Okay.
As far as I know.
Okay.
But so the question is, yes to vaccines. Yes, they are important, and they are an important part of our health care. Can we do better? Can we make them safer? Can we make them, can we listen to parents who say, my child got the vaccine and changed, and stopped hitting markers, stopped developing the way they were developing? Can we listen to people when they say that instead of saying,
you're
crazy?
I agree with that, but you want to listen. But you want to listen to science.
That is just a fantastic fantastic job. Now, if you had like me on The View or Dr. Meryl Nass, like it would have been like nuclear, right? We would have done a different thing. But Cheryl Hines can go in and just twist their view just a little bit, speak to a liberal audience, and do so in a way that can really change hearts and minds. And Cheryl Hines is going to be speaking at the CHD conference in Austin, Texas, November 7th through the 9th. She's actually going to have a dinner conversation with Russell Brand Saturday night at our dinner. She is the latest addition to this amazing lineup. Also, Dr. Dave Weldon is going to be there, an absolute legend in Congress for sticking up for the vaccine injured, and also the original CDC nominee of Trump and Robert F. Kennedy Jr., although he got shut down without even getting a hearing. He'll be there to tell us some of his story. Couple more headlines. New York Post article, breaking, talking about New York City Health Department seeks outside firm to help protect staff still being harassed over COVID protocols. Oh, so these poor staffers who lock people down, force vaccines on people have questions for them and are trying to hold them accountable. We tweeted about this at Teachers for Choice. NYC can't stop protecting their COVID disinformation. Let's read this. There were a lot of untruths told by the health department, and they should be on their hands and knees apologizing, reinstating, and compensating any New Yorker harmed by the false statements they made. But instead, their response is to point fingers at people with logical questions and logical reasons to be upset with them and spend money to protect themselves. That's from Diane Pagan, who's a member of Teachers for Choice on our steering committee. Joanne Ariola made a comment there, but let's pull it down in the interest of time. So we don't want anybody getting hurt or doxxed. There might be some crazy people calling New York City Department of Health like, you guys go, blah, 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 some crazy stuff. No one supports that. That should be shut down. But I'm sure the overwhelming majority of this is, why did you mandate a shot that didn't stop transmission? Why did you shut the schools? And they're paying an outside counsel to help protect them from really good questions. Shame on them. So today, if you're a fired New York City worker, today we want you to write a letter to the editor at the New York Post. This link will be in the show notes. Go to teachersforchoice.substack.com. If you write a letter to the editor with your response about this piece, it might get published in their next letter to the editor edition. So go to teachersforchoice.substack.com if you're a fired unvaccinated worker, and let the New York Post know what you think about that. Speaking of that, Dr. Asim Malhotra says there needs to be a formal apology for all of the COVID era nonsense. Headline says, formal, unequivocal apologies needed to restore public trust after COVID vaccine mandates. I could not agree with Dr. Asim Malhotra more. This is the problem. This is why you get angry people calling health departments, is because they're still acting like they didn't do anything wrong. There needs to be an apology. There needs to be a reckoning. There needs to be a full investigation. This is not something that is in the past. This is going to impact us for years and decades ahead. Florida, shout out to Florida. Great bill. Florida bill would require medical examiners to include recent vaccination history when investigating sudden deaths of infants or children. What a novel idea. This is a great way to collect data, not to blame a vaccine for the death, but to say, let's collect the data and let's see if we have a wide data set. Wouldn't that help us to determine if vaccines are a component, do play a role in SIDS or sudden unexpected death in childhood? Shout out to the Florida CHD chapter who helped to get that bill going. CHD definitely supports that bill. Here's an interesting podcast from Jumi Kim. Jumi Kim just discovered Chelsea Clinton hates Maha. So Chelsea Clinton, of course, the daughter of Bill and Hillary Clinton, is on a rampage against Maha. Jumi Kim put out this 20-minute response where she plays the podcast and then she replies to it. That is fabulous. Shout out to Jumi Kim. I don't really know who she is. This is the first time I've been exposed to her work, but she was fantastic. I hope to get her on the show one day, maybe to talk about Chelsea Clinton hating Maha. And the last piece, This is a frightening one. This is, they're coming to get our data. Reclaim the net. Spotify just warned some users, verify your age with facial recognition or lose your account. They partnered with a third-party app called Yoti to scan your face via smartphone and decide how old you appear. If the AI thinks you look too young, you're forced to upload ID. Fail to comply in 90 days, and you're deleted. Facial recognition is the tip of the spear when it comes to the bio data grab. I think that's for sure. We're seeing it at stadiums. We're seeing it out in the public. We're seeing it at airports. Now we're seeing it in your apps. Now we're seeing it when you want to stream Joe Rogan or CHD TV or Good Morning CHD. Definitely frightening, and we need to keep our eyes and ears on this one always. Okay, and with that, I now want to bring in our first guest, Mariana Slaughter, who was just recently interviewed in Tragedy in Paradise. Mariana, thank you so much for joining us this morning. How are you?
I'm great. Good morning.
So before we get into the actual documentary, you didn't know the title of the documentary before you got interviewed.
No, I did not.
Did not. So tell me about that. I want to know what you did know from the reporter and what you didn't know, how they approached you, to take our audience through that.
So I was asked to speak with him from the leader of one of our local advocacy organizations, Georgia Coalition for Vaccine Choice. And he had reached out and tried to get multiple different mothers of children, still school-age children living within the home, who delay or do not vaccinate their children. And multiple other mothers had said no before they asked me. And I said, sure, why not? All that we were told was that they wanted the perspective of a vaccine hesitant mother who had children in their home in a story that they were doing about local vaccine hesitancy.
And so that was the extent of what you were told prior to the interview happening.
Yes.
Okay. Yes. The interview happens. How long? It happened, I believe, in your home. I believe he came into your house.
Yes, he did.
So how long did the interview go for?
It was at least an hour. Just the sit down, back and forth interview discussion that we had. But then he also, after that, spent some time with my family and just filmed me interacting with my family and living our lives.
Right. And I have watched the video, so I have seen that. You obviously have a lovely family and a lovely home. But let's show the trailer for this film. Let's show that.
Yes.
I saw what a whole society being ravaged by measles will look like, and it's not pretty.
The measles death toll in Samoa is now 62.
A national emergency has been in place since last month, closing all schools, banning children from public gatherings.
It was chaos, a lot of confusion.
It's broke me to a million pieces.
Hi, darling. Hi.
Because she's my first child.
We don't know what was killing them.
He's trying now to play down his role in Samoa. That's not what the parents say.
From my standpoint, should rot in hell for this.
His presence in Samoa was significant for the anti-vaxxers.
Measles cases here in the U.S. are at their highest in 3 decades.
It's a big problem, and it's a very concerning problem.
You will be shocked. I know a whole lot more people whose children are partially vaccinated or completely unvaccinated.
The Atlanta-based Centers for Disease Control and Prevention says the U.S. has reported nearly 1,300 cases.
I mean, from my point of view, I just want to protect your child.
Why should people in Georgia, the United States, care what happened in Samoa?
Because it could happen here. It could very much happen here.
So it could happen here. And in that trailer, they use you and your family to hype up how many unvaccinated people you know in Georgia, with tense, scary, frightening music playing as they show your lovely family in slow-mo.
Right.
Talk to me a little bit about this. When did you find out that this was going to be a possibility? Was it before your interview, during, or after?
Coincidentally, it was just a few days after my interview was completed.
So
I got a call from Andy, and he told me that the story had taken a little bit of a turn, that he had applied for some grants and he was awarded a grant. And so he was going to be able to look, he was kind of shifting the story to focus more on RFK and his effect on the measles outbreak in Samoa.
What is Andy's full name, the reporter that did this?
Andy Parati.
Andy Parati from Atlanta First News, right? It's a
Atlanta
new
News First.
Atlanta News First. So he had a full hour interview with you already done, and then changed the scope of what was going to happen. I want to show one. There's a lot of footage from you in this. There's, I mean, probably 10 minutes in total of you, your family, your house. But there's one clip I want to show just to give an example of some of the things that they did. Let's show this clip of Mariana being interviewed.
Counter, and none of them are vaccinated. Her decision based on her Christian faith and her belief vaccines impact immune systems.
And I don't hide my children in a hole. So if we're out at a playground or at a grocery store or in a restaurant, they're exposed to life. I don't protect my children. I want them to be strong, both in their social skills, in their intelligence, and in their immune system.
Now, people might not notice what they did there, but what they did was they cut to the playground, to the grocery store, to the restaurant of these unprotected, unvaccinated children that they already had you in the preview saying that you'd be shocked how many of these kids are out there. They're intentionally taking your words to talk about what you believe causes healthy children, what builds their immune system, and using that to place fear into the viewer. Your comments, your thoughts on this?
Yes, and when you think about, when you put yourself back before the grant was given to him, and this was just a story on local vaccine rates dropping, which was what we talked about in our pre-interview conversations. What we were talking about was just that this is not something to necessarily make a big deal of now. It's not something to be super afraid of. Like, we're healthy. There are a lot of people in our community that are unvaccinated. Most adults have not received the amount of vaccines that are currently on the childhood immunization schedule. And so, you know, we're living our lives. Some of us are protected by vaccines, protected. Some of us are not protected by vaccines, and we're all healthy and we're all doing fine. And this is not something to be afraid of. We don't have to live in fear. We don't have to, discriminate against each other. And he took that one piece and really ran with it down this measles rabbit hole.
Earlier when I was talking to you, you'd said to me that there were a lot of questions about the MMR vaccine during your interview, and it even stuck out to you at that time. You're like, that's interesting that there's a focus on this one vaccine when that's not what I was told.
There weren't necessarily a lot of questions about the MMR that he asked me, but he did not ask me any questions about any other vaccines. He asked me just a couple of questions about the MMR and just a couple of questions about RFK, but he didn't go into any other vaccines. It was just very much a small side conversation. Our main conversation was about how we live our lives in a healthy way, and what works for our family is to not vaccinate our children.
So how do you feel now, having saw the film, seeing how they spun this and spun your use in this, and inviting this reporter into your home and having your family on this show? How do you feel about this?
Well, I definitely feel betrayed by him, and that that doesn't fall lightly on me. But more concerning is the fact that we still have a very well organized, well funded arm within our media that is out to destroy anyone who goes against their opinions on things. I'm not so much worried about me. I have a freedom here in Georgia. I'm not worried about my children. I'm not worried about me. But what they're doing in spreading this propaganda about RFK is they're sowing a national discord between health freedom advocates and people who are falling for this propaganda. And that's really unhealthy for our society as a whole.
Very, very well said. I want to bring into this conversation now Tia Severino. Tia is also a Georgia-based activist. A friend of mine, does great work. How you doing today, Tia? Is Tia muted?
Oh,
there we go. We got you.
Thank you. I wanted to make sure there wasn't any background noise because, you know, I do have a loud boy living here. So anyway, thank you for covering this. I really appreciate that. When I reached out to you, I knew this would be something that would grab the attention of CHD, but we really should all be concerned about this because this is a strong attack on our current HHS secretary and his agenda. It's by no mistake that they're falling back on the old measles scare. You know, it's kind of ridiculous. We ought to be past this by now, but.
And Tia, let's talk about the next stage of this attack, because there is a next stage. They're coming in the first week of November to Emory College to show this documentary where Dr. Peter Marks, who's featured in the documentary, is going to be attending this screening, answering questions. And I believe the title is, correct me if I'm wrong, Rebuilding Vaccine Confidence? Is that what it is?
Well, you know, that's really interesting that they chose that title. You don't need to rebuild confidence in something unless you've lost trust. So it's almost an admission. In fact, when I heard the name, I said, this is a sign that we're winning because they have to have an event called Rebuilding Vaccine Confidence because they have lost the trust and confidence of the public. They really blew a lot of trust with COVID. And so, you know, it's no surprise to me that they're going back to the old measles because COVID's a dead horse. But I was thinking, like, who are they trying to rebuild vaccine confidence in? And it's clearly not those of us that have lost confidence in it. The parents who have vaccine injured children, those of us that are working in the health freedom movement, people like Mariana, who I would say is probably the only truly anti-vax person in this conversation right now, because most of us that are in this world, we got here because we trusted the vaccine program at one point. We trusted medical professionals. We vaccinated our children or ourselves, and our children or ourselves are hurt. You know, in my case, I'm injured, my kids are injured. You know, you've lost my trust because we got hurt. Okay.
So Tia, one of the things you said to me was that you felt one of the target audiences was young medical students. Why don't you talk about that a little? Yeah.
That's where I was heading. They're obviously not aiming this at us. They are looking to capture these young medical students. It's actually at the Emory Rollins School of Public Health. And so they are looking to indoctrinate the students there. That's the only reason why they would come in with this film and a completely pro-vaccine panel. There's also the Georgia president of the American Academy of Pediatrics, which, as we know, have taken a very bold stand against RFK Jr. and the changes at the CDC. In fact, they're saying, no, don't follow the new recommendations from the CDC ACIP panel. You need to continue with this broken schedule that we believe in. And so, you know, I don't know if that opens them up to liability because I believe for the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Program, you have to be recommended. It has to be a recommended vaccine. But it's interesting that they have the Georgia president of the Georgia chapter of AAP there, and another supposedly a science influencer. I don't know, someone that gets on social media and espouses the the official narrative. And anyway, so they're looking to keep these young minds. I believe that the plan for this event is to fill it with students and others who are who want to know how they can combat the misinformation. I like what Dell calls it, missed information, but the misinformation that's out there with young parents who maybe aren't fully educated like some of us are, and are asking questions when they're seeing their doctors about.
Let's give people the info they need. You don't have to buy tickets, but you have to register for tickets. Lou, why don't you put up the landing page again? This is going to be on November 5th. The link is in the show notes. It'll be the first link. If you click there, you can register, and you also can submit questions. I believe questions need to be submitted in advance. Is that right, Tia?
Yes, they're not doing any kind of live Q&A with the audience. That would be too dangerous.
Of course not.
So they're pre-screening these questions. And so, and if anybody needs help kind of formulating questions, what I will say is please keep the questions to the topic of the measles outbreak in Samoa and the MMR and RFK Jr., because that's the focus of this event and the film. So we're not talking about polio or COVID or smallpox or any of those other things. Just focus on the subject matter. If you're going to submit a question, please watch the film first so you know what you're asking questions about. So on that landing page, everything you need to know about the film and the event is there. So you can watch the film. You can register for the event. It is free, but you do have to register. You can submit questions. I would ask that you submit thoughtful, thought-provoking, respectful, probing questions about these topics. And you can also kind of find the social media. You can find out information about these other panelists. So educate yourself on who these people are. There's 3 people. There's Peter Marks, and I forget the name of the other 2, but it is on this landing page. So go to the landing page, watch the film, register for the event, submit questions. And then the last thing I would say is get on social media, and everywhere you can, counter this narrative. I have posted the post that Andy Parati has posted. So you can find them if you go to my Facebook page on social media. And I would say in preparation for this that you should read the article that Dr. James Lyons Weiler put on his Substack. I believe you can find it by going to Popular Rationalism and just put in the search term Samoa, and it'll be the second thing down. It's got Paul Offit is in the title, and he's talking about Paul Offit's the falsehoods that he was putting out about RFK around the Samoa. But he really breaks down what happened in Samoa, which is, this is a small island nation in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. They don't have access to great nutrition. A lot of the people that needed to be served by the vaccine program are in hard to reach areas. The cold chain refrigeration was broken. So they were actually vaccinating with vaccines that hadn't been kept in cold storage.
Right.
The initial vaccine hesitancy that spread throughout the islands had to do with 2 children who died immediately after MMR vaccination that was improperly administered. I think they mixed with something like muscle relaxant instead of the saline solution that they're supposed to reconstitute it with. And Dr. Jack goes over all of that in his Substack. So the cold chain refrigeration the breaking of that, and the misadministration. There was vaccine hesitation in the islands well before RFK ever said anything about it. In fact, when he went to Samoa, it had nothing to do with that. So, it's all been really, really misrepresented, his involvement and what happened there. There's also vitamin A deficiency. And I think probably one of the most compelling points that Dr. James Lyons Weiler presents in his Substack article is that a lot of the kids that died were administered the MMR while they had an active measles infection.
That is
It was medical error and a lot of other things.
That is such a horrendous concept that could even happen, that anyone would think, hey, let's vaccinate them with a vaccine that doesn't work for a number of weeks for the disease they have, right? Now,
They do the same thing with the tetanus shot. You know, they try to give you a tetanus shot when you might have been exposed. But one more point I want to make, which I think is really important, is that, you know, they say in the trailer it could happen here. No, it could not. We do not have the same conditions as what presented in Samoa. We have access to good nutrition. We know not to break the cold chain, the refrigeration process for the vaccines. We know how to administer the vaccines, and we know not to administer the vaccine during an active infection. We have access to good nutrition. We have access to good healthcare. In fact, if someone gets a measles infection, we know how to treat it. So
one of the things that one of the things that we saw in West Texas was medical error leading to death of children and being blamed on measles. I need to wrap up this segment. We're not calling for protests.
Nope.
We're not calling for rallies in Georgia on November 5th. Register, go there. Watch the film. Be respectful in everything that you do. Submit your questions. We want to hear what Peter Marks has to say. We want to get this on the record and move forward with it. Tia and Mariana, I have to close out now, but are either of you planning on attending November 5th, the screening?
Yes, I will be there, and there is actually going to be additional footage shown of my interview. So please attend, support. I am a small person. I'm a representation of a large, beautiful, wonderful group of parents who are advocating for their children. And I think that the health professionals that are going to be in that room need to see us. They need to see us in a peaceful, mature setting where we can have a healthy dialogue.
Mariana, I think I'm going to call on Emory University, Peter Marks, and everyone involved to have you on the panel. Why wouldn't you be included and be allowed up there when they brought you into the film under false pretenses? I'm so sorry. We have to cut this off now. But Tia Severino, Mariana Slaughter, thank you so much for all that you're doing. Thanks for coming on here to talk about this today.
Thank you.
So everybody in Georgia or in the Georgia area, November 5th, the first link in the show notes will get you to register to go see this film. Peter Marks is going to be there on November 5th at Emory University. It's an important action, even if there isn't bullhorns and protests and signs. It's an important action that you show up and that you're involved in this if you're in the area. And with that, I'm going to be turning it over to the legendary Dr. Meryl Nass to discuss some really exciting bills from Representative Thomas Massie. Turn it over to Meryl.
Good morning, CHD. We're doing this live. So today is the 21st of October. And I wanted to do something different today. I wanted to talk about the process of government in the United States. We are supposed to have a representative government, right? That is what a republic is. We elect officials, they represent us, they take our needs to Washington, and they are supposed to then try to affect laws that will help their constituents. Now, we often feel like that doesn't work. It hasn't worked like that for a long time, but perhaps it can. Maybe there is a process by which it should work. And I wanted to talk about what that process was. I wanted to specifically talk about an amazing Congressman Thomas Massie, and some bills he has introduced and some others he has co-sponsored. And I wanted to get clear about what the Constitution tells us. And in particular, because I don't have time to talk about the whole Constitution, I wanted to briefly go over the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, which is the Bill of Rights, which were ratified by states in 1991 and then became part of the Constitution. Some states refused to ratify the Constitution until the Bill of Rights were added because they guaranteed the rights of the individual citizens. They said what the government could do and what the government wasn't allowed to do. So let me let's talk about the Bill of Rights. Now, the first Bill of Rights is the First Amendment, of course, which is freedom of speech, but it's much more than freedom of speech. It is freedom of assembly, freedom of the press, freedom of the religion, which says that the government does not have the right to force a religion on us, nor to restrict our ability to practice whatever religion we want. So that's pretty important. And then finally, we have the right to petition the government for a redress of grievances. In other words, if the government does something we don't like, we have the right to challenge it. We are not forced to just sit there and take it. And that's very important. We can sue. We can take steps to challenge the government. Okay, Second Amendment is one that's rather controversial now because it has to do with a militia and the right to bear arms. So it says specifically, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. That seems very clear. What precedes that is that we need a well-regulated militia. And some people interpret this to say, well, you could only have arms when you are within a militia. Others disagree. I happen to disagree, but that's the Second Amendment. Third Amendment says the government can't take over your home and force you to put soldiers up there to fight. Fourth Amendment is very important because it was written way before we had electronic means of communication. And so what it says is the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue but upon probable cause. So what does that mean? It says Americans have the right to full privacy. No one can come into your house on a fishing expedition looking for things to charge you with. If they want to come into your home and look at your papers, they have to have a warrant. That warrant can only be given by a judge if probable cause has been shown. If there is some sort of evidence that there is a reason to look for things in your home. Now, why this is important is because, of course, with electronic communication, the government is able to look at almost everything we say and do electronically. And according to the Fourth Amendment, it should not have that right, nor should private companies, presumably, have that right either, but they do. And so maybe this is something we should think about fixing. The Fifth Amendment says they can't just charge you with a crime, but if it's a serious crime, a grand jury has to be seated, look at the evidence, and determine whether this is sufficient enough to charge you with a crime. You cannot be deprived of life, liberty, property without due process, right? There has to be a legal process before your rights are taken away by putting you in jail or charging you with a crime. And private property can't be taken by the government without compensating you properly. Sixth Amendment, everybody has the right to a public and speedy trial. No secret trials, no secret tribunals, no military tribunals that are held in places like Cuba, for example. Seventh Amendment, if you have a disagreement and the value of that disagreement is worth at least $20, you have the right to a jury trial. This is a problem because now most trials are conducted by judges. You do not have you can request a jury, as I did in my cases, but I was not given a jury trial, I was given a judge trial. That's a problem. Because, as you know, one judge is more likely to be biased than 12 jurors or 6 jurors or however many. The Eighth Amendment says no cruel or unusual punishments, and basically you're innocent until proven guilty. Ninth Amendment says just because the Constitution gives certain rights to the government doesn't mean the government has more than those rights. Other rights or powers revert to the people. And the 10th Amendment, which is in some ways the most important, says if a power is not specifically delegated to the federal government by the Constitution, nor prohibited to the states, then that power is reserved to the states or to the people, which says the federal government cannot usurp, cannot grab powers unless the Constitution has given the federal government those powers. And as many of us know, that in fact is not what happens. The federal government often usurps powers that the Constitution did not give it. For example, this shooting of boats claimed to belong to the Venezuelan government or Venezuelans for drug running, that power was not given by the Constitution to the federal government to just shoot up boats in international waters when there has been no due process, no legal process, no evidence proffered, and no trial. Okay, so that's the basis of maybe our most important rights and freedoms in the United States. And now let's look at what some of the laws are that Representative Massie has introduced this year and how they may relate to the Bill of Rights, and also some bills, if we have time, that he has co-sponsored but has not personally introduced. Why do I talk about Representative Massie today? Well, he is a very unusual member of Congress. He does not bow to authority. So even though he is a Republican and a libertarian, he does not do what the leaders of the Republican Party necessarily tell him to do. He went to MIT. He is an engineer. He has many patents. He and his wife built a company and then sold it and then returned to Kentucky, built their own home out of rocks and wood that were on the property. This was property they purchased from her parents. He completely wired the place up himself, uses a Tesla car battery to store energy. And he is honest to a fault. So he's very unusual. And the New York Times chose to do a 2 full-page article on this gentleman 2.5 years ago, and talked about how unique he is and how so many people admire him for what he does. Okay, so let me talk now about some of the bills that he has introduced this year in the 119th Congress, which goes this year and next year. The first bill is called Repeal of the Smith-Mundt Modernization Act. So the Smith-Mundt Act is an old bill that stopped the United States government from propagandizing its citizens. Unfortunately, in 2013, under Obama, this act was amended such that because the government was allowed to spend money propagandizing the citizens of other countries, but supposedly not this one. Under Obama, it was amended so that the government could propagandize Americans as well. What this bill seeks to do is to stop that from happening, saying that no, propaganda that's been developed to be used against other countries cannot then be adopted and used against citizens of the United States. Now, let me talk about how this bill came to, or how any bill comes to be. So a representative can dream up a bill, the party can dream up a bill, corporations can dream up a bill and get their lobbyists to convince a member of Congress to introduce the bill. It has to be introduced to Congress by a member of Congress. But then you need many more members to agree with the purpose of the bill and to make efforts to pass the bill. Once there is a bill written, okay, so you, as a citizen, can make friends with your senator or representative, and you can ask them to introduce a bill for you. Now, the bill needs to be written carefully. It needs to have taken into account all the other bills that exist and be consistent with them or refer to them and talk about how it will change them or how they need to be amended. You need to think about what committees will be discussing it, and a similar, basically an identical or almost identical bill needs to be passed by both houses of Congress and then signed by the president in order for it to become law. So how do you make friends with your congressman? Well, you can go to, they may have lunches or dinners. They love it if you put on a fundraiser for them. So if you have the means to do that, it doesn't necessarily have to cost you a lot of money, but usually it involves providing some sort of food, coffee, liquor, or a meal, and getting the member of Congress to speak. And you invite your friends, and hopefully they will write checks to this person for their next run for Congress. And if you put on fundraisers, you will definitely become a friend of your congressman. Well, in this case, I don't know. I think probably Congressman Massie himself came up with this Smith Modernization Act. And I'll point out that when I wrote a list of 15 items that we needed to change to stop, to prevent the government from ever imposing the COVID restrictions on us again, one of my 15 items was to amend the Smith Modernization Act and stop the federal government from being allowed to lie to and propagandize Americans. Okay. The next bill I want to talk about is the PRIME Act, Processing Revival and Intrastate Meat Exemption Act. Now, as I've talked about in other CHD TV shows about the problems with meat processing now, we know that farmers get a much smaller percentage, 30%, 30 cents or under on the dollar for the animals they raise. We know that in 1970, they used to get at least 70 cents on the dollar. We know that meat processing plants have been closed down due to excessive federal regulations, and that there is a shortage of meat processing, and that there are 4 companies that control 85% of all beef processing in the entire United States. What happens is that in order to sell meat freely in the US across state lines, it must be butchered and processed, or at a minimum butchered, slaughtered, in a USDA inspected facility. In some cases, it can then be processed elsewhere. Now, but there are limited USDA slaughterhouses. And so when a rancher brings his cattle to the slaughterhouse, he often has to take whatever the processor is willing to pay him. He doesn't have options to go to another slaughterhouse, which may be hundreds of miles away. And in fact, these 4 companies that do 85% of the processing collude so that the prices that they are willing to pay are about the same everywhere. Now, there are some states, about half the states, do have state inspected facilities for slaughtering and processing meat. But by law, and according to USDA, you can only sell that meat within the state itself. It must not cross state lines. Even though the requirements for state inspections are at least as rigid as those for USDA managed inspections. Then there is a third type of facility. These are small local meat slaughtering and sometimes processing facilities that are called custom facilities. And there is an exemption such that allows these small custom facilities to butcher meat and, in many cases, process it. However, that meat cannot be sold. It can't be sold within the state. It can't be sold across state lines. That meat can only be given back to the person who raised it, and it is labeled not for resale. So the farmer can eat that meat himself. He can give it away. He can't sell it. Now, these custom slaughterhouses, while they don't require 24/7 inspectors to be present, often they do come under state inspection. The state must inspect them at times and must approve these facilities. And there are thousands of them that shut down because of increased regulations over the last 20 to 30 years. And now that we have a bottleneck in processing, it would make sense to try to reopen some of these facilities. And so what the Prime Act is trying to do is saying that if you have a state-approved custom slaughterhouse, that if the state agrees, it could now start to process and sell meat, but only within the state. So that is what the Prime Act would do. Now, this Prime Act, a similar bill has been introduced to every Congress for the last 6 or 7 Congresses, and it hasn't gotten very far because the large meat industry is very powerful, very wealthy. The company that sells and processes the most beef in the United States, which is JBS, also processes the most beef in the entire world. And they've been found guilty of bribing many politicians in Brazil. They paid a lot of fines, and their lobbying is very effective. So they've kept these small slaughterhouses from being able to sell meat. However, now we know that the number of cattle in the United States is down to as low as it was in 1951. We're only processing 5% more meat than we were more than 30 years ago. Meat that is coming in from overseas may have the New World screwworm, doesn't have to meet federal requirements as U.S. processed meat does. And so there's a greater acknowledgement that we need more U.S. grown and U.S. processed meat. And so the Prime Act actually has a possibility of passing this year. There are 43 House members that are co-sponsors and 9 senators that have co-sponsored the identical bill. And so if you think it's a good idea to increase the number of slaughterhouses that can sell within a state and make local meat much more available to us for purchase, then consider contacting your congressman and saying you support HR 4700, Thomas Massie's Prime Act. And let me just tell you, for some strange reason, there is another Prime Act that has to do with military purchases, and that is not the Prime Act you want. You want Thomas Massie's Prime Act 4700. Now, there may be other bills you want to talk to your congressman's office about, and you may want to get your friends, even if they're in different districts, to contact their congress member's office. And I mean Congress and Senate. The bill has a different name in the Senate, but it is still the Prime Act. It is still doing exactly the same thing, which is to allow custom slaughterhouses to sell locally. Okay, the PrEP Repeal Act is another important bill that Congressman Massie has introduced. This would take away the liability shield that is now given to the COVID vaccine manufacturers and certain other vaccine manufacturers when they produce what are designated as countermeasures. This is very important. I showed you the Bill of Rights. I showed you that if you're injured or if you have some controversy that's worth more than $20, you have the right to a jury trial. That's what the Bill of Rights says. But unfortunately, the PrEP Act, when it was passed, was unconstitutional. It says you don't have the right to a jury trial. All you have the right to is an administrative procedure within HHS that has paid out very little money and has paid it to very few people who claimed injuries from COVID vaccines or from any other countermeasure. There have been, I think, less than 100 people in the at least in the 15 years since the PrEP Act has been paying out money, less than 100 people have received any payouts, and the average amount they receive, or the median amount they receive, is about $4,000 per person. So the guarantee of a liability shield for countermeasures, as I said, was unconstitutional, bad idea, bad for people. If you're injured, you don't get treated fairly. and you may want to think about supporting this PrEP Repeal Act, which is HR 4388. Okay. Now, there was a congressional resolution that Massie supported also, which says the president cannot attack Iran without authorization from Congress. As you probably know, Congress is required to declare war before the United States embarks in hostile activities or a war against another nation. But in fact, most of the time, this is ignored. This means Congress is not doing its designated job. Congress is acting in an unconstitutional fashion. And so this bill, this congressional, it's not a bill, it's a resolution saying that the government doesn't have the right to attack Iran unless Congress agrees. That seems pretty reasonable. It's consistent with the Constitution, and that is Resolution 38. Okay, want to go quickly down a few more. The Gold Reserve Transparency Act, HR 3795, says, come on, guys, it is time that we audited the gold in Fort Knox. How much gold does the United States own? It has not been properly audited in more than 65 years. Next one, Dual Loyalty Disclosure Act. It turns out that, so we're told, many members of Congress have dual citizenship, which means they owe dual loyalty to the United States and at least one other country. And this act would require members of Congress and senators who have dual citizenship to disclose that they have it and to which country they owe dual loyalty. I think that's very reasonable. That is HR 2356. Here's another good one, introduced by Massie, the Federal Reserve Board Abolition Act. So in 2013, a bunch of the wealthiest bankers in America secretly got together and decided to push for a central bank in the United States, but not have it owned by the government. Create a sort of quasi-governmental private enterprise that is owned by the banks, but does do work for the government. And apparently, there was almost no inflation in the United States until this Federal Reserve Board was instituted, and it was given the power, many powers, to manage federal funds. And since then, we have had enormous inflation. The banks have become very wealthy. There are many other issues regarding the role of the Federal Reserve, which again has not been audited properly in pretty much forever. And so abolishing it, or at least auditing it, find out what it's been doing and to whose benefit, is a great idea. The next is HR 1040, and that would eliminate federal taxes on Social Security benefits. President Trump has talked about that also. That might be something you're interested in. The Federal Reserve Transparency Act, which is HR 24, requires the Federal Reserve to be audited by the Comptroller General of the United States, so who is the head of the Government Accountability Office. So that would be a good thing. Let's get the audit. Now, there are some other bills, and let's see if I can find them. Perhaps, one moment. Okay. So here is an interesting bill. This is HR 4837. It was introduced by someone who runs a non-governmental organization to help veterans. And what he asked for was that informed consent be required before veterans receive certain drugs that affect their brain from the Veterans Administration. Seems pretty simple. What drugs would I told him that's not going to work for all drugs. They're not, it's going to take too much time. But he said, no, it's only for specific drugs that really can cause significant brain issues and problems, and veterans need to be told what these drugs can do before they're handed out to them. And in fact, we know that psychiatric drugs have been used to control veterans and soldiers under certain conditions. Pilots are given stimulants to stay awake for long periods of time. In Afghanistan and Iraq, soldiers that had very troubling jobs were often told to use antidepressants, for example, which can make you homicidal or suicidal. So the drugs that would require a written informed consent include antipsychotics, stimulants, antidepressants, anxiolytics like Valium, and narcotics. Now, so that's a very good idea. It doesn't have many co-sponsors, but it would be a foot in the door. It would crack the door open to getting informed consent for other citizens besides veterans when we receive certain questionable drugs from our doctors. And perhaps there should be written informed consent when we receive any drug from our doctor or any vaccine. So consider that. It's HR 4837, does not have a lot of co-sponsors, introduced by Gus Bilirakis. Massie is one of the co-sponsors. Here's another one, HR 54. This was introduced by Andy Biggs, and it is Get Out of the World Health Organization. I think all of us would agree with this. By making it a bill, this is a stronger effort to stay out of the World Health Organization compared to an executive order, which can just be turned around if the next president does not want to stay out of the WHO. The bill also repeals the 1948 act that authorized the United States to join the WHO and prohibits federal funds for participating in the WHO. All right, another bill. This is called the First Amendment Accountability Act, and I love this one. It was introduced by Harriet Hageman, who is another very independent member of the House of Representatives from Wyoming. And what it says is, if a federal official deprives Americans of any of their rights that the First Amendment secures, remember that's freedom of the press, speech, assembly, religion, and the right to seek redress from the government. If the feds stop you from going to church, inhibit your free speech, inhibit your freedom of the press, then we are making that a crime. That did not exist. So taking away those First Amendment rights did not exist as a federal crime up until now. And she's trying to make it a crime. As one person who had those rights taken away, I think that's very important. When we have things that everybody knows are a crime, but they are not listed as crimes in law, you can't go after the people who commit those crimes. All right. One more is Executive in Need of Scrutiny Act. This is HR 142. And what this does is say agencies, as you know, federal agencies make rules and regulations which are supposed to conform with the laws that Congress has passed, but don't necessarily always do so. And what this says is, look, if a rule or regulation is a major rule, if it causes more than $100 million to be spent in a year or causes certain other significant effects, then Congress needs to review that rule or regulation. It's not just up to the federal agency to pass it. So I think that's a very good rule, or a very good law. And one more interesting bill is the Chiropractic Medicare Coverage Modernization Act of 2025. This was introduced by Representative Greg Steube from Florida, and it has 125 co-sponsors. That's a lot of co-sponsors. What it says is that Medicare, instead of only reimbursing chiropractors for very, very limited types of treatment, This would expand the types of treatment. If a chiropractor is working within their licensed ability to practice, Medicare should be able to compensate them for that. So if you support Medicare paying chiropractors, you may want to talk to your Congress member's office about that. And then here's final thing I'm going to tell you about is HR 4405, which is the 119th Congress, in other words, brought in this year. Representative Massie is really pushing for this Epstein Files Transparency Act. It's requiring that the Department of Justice publish the Epstein files. And Congressman Massie thought that a new member of Congress was just being initiated a couple of weeks ago, and he feels that will give him the majority to pass this Epstein Files Transparency Act. So now you can sign petitions and they count a bit, but you can make a call, you can send a fax, you can write a letter, they all count more. Right? When congressional offices try to figure out and value the information they're getting from their constituents, they put a higher value on a letter. They put slightly less value on a phone call. They put less than that value on an email, and less if you sign a petition. So I recommend you make phone calls, you write down the bill number or the name of the bills you want to support, and make sure that the person on the other end writes down those bill numbers one by one and knows you're supporting them. And that way you'll have the most impact on your member of Congress. And if you can get your friends to do the same thing in other districts, or ask those Congress members, say, look, this is something right up your alley. This is an issue you have supported in the past. Become a co-sponsor of this bill. Ask your other members of Congress to support it. And when they hear from a lot of people, especially if it's not going to cost them money or they don't have very expensive lobbyists lobbying against it, they will often vote in favor. So please consider that. Thanks for listening to me, and I hope this was helpful.
Okay, we are live. Can you tell us your name, please?
My name is Dr. Sherry Weinstein.
And what kind of a doctor are you?
I am board certified in internal medicine and age management regenerative medicine.
All right, and which story do you want to start with? Because you've seen a lot of death and destruction with these COVID shots.
Absolutely. I'll start with that of my mother.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, my mom was a pretty healthy 80-year-old, and she had a history of diabetes and had been taking a medication called Ozempic, and ended up having pancreatic cancer, which I picked up at a stage 1A, which is unheard of. And the cure for that is just resection. So we did resect that. She was doing great for about 12 months, and she felt that she probably should do something more, like chemotherapy or immunotherapy. And I didn't want her to do that without making sure that she was safe from an infection like COVID. So I was going to have her just get maybe a J&J vaccine if she really needed to have one before getting chemo.
Did you, at this point, believe that the J&J was okay? You wouldn't advise it for your mother, would you?
I thought it was safer technology than the mRNA technology because it was more similar to our old vaccine technology. Taking a spike protein and putting it in an adenovirus is more similar to what we've done. So I thought it had to be safer, and it turns out it is safer than the mRNA. However, she didn't get the mRNA. She did not get the J&J shot. She went and was scared to death with all the propaganda. So she got an mRNA shot. I believe she had Pfizer's, 2 Pfizer's. And with the first shot, no problem. The second shot, she could not use her hands. She had excruciating arthritis. She couldn't feed herself, couldn't eat, couldn't toilet, bathe, anything. She had to move in with me. My siblings and I cared for her 24/7. And that was for the the last 4 months of her life, it wasn't just the pain from the arthritis, but within weeks of having the shots, her tumor markers from the cancer came back, and she had metastatic pancreatic cancer all over her body, stage 4, within a month or 2 of the vaccine. So she died 4 months after her shots, after she had been cured from pancreatic cancer.
I'm sorry, that's tragic.
But she knew what was going on, and she's in a better place now.
Oh, yeah.
That's the good part of that story. She would have been devastated to know that we've allowed this to happen.
All right, and what else did you see in your clinic? So did you give COVID shots at your clinic?
I gave J&J vaccinations to my patients that really were literally scared to death, and they were going to get something else, so I gave them the J&Js. And I have not had significant issues. I've had a couple of stage 1A stage 1 breast cancers with the J&Js, but I haven't, and those are older women that may or may not have gotten cancer anyways. But I have not seen the level of destruction and cancers that I'm seeing with the mRNAs. Lots of cancers, aggressive cancers, turbo cancers, absolutely. People that had been in remission and no evidence of cancer, and now stage 4, very aggressive in young people too.
Yeah, and we're seeing multiple sclerosis as well. I don't know if you've seen it, but huge in the young, in the
damage. My own cousin ended up with neurologic damage, with presenting with like a choreiform movements and could not stand anymore. Some of my best friends actually had autonomic dysfunction such that they couldn't stand up again.
So now that more evidence has come out about the dangers of all of the shots actually now, does your clinic, has it stopped giving the
Absolutely.
COVID?
Absolutely.
Okay, that's good to know.
And they withdrew the COVID shots. I mean, people may not understand what was going on, too. I was actually looking at everybody's vaccine cards and noted, first of all, the vaccine package insert was completely blank, so there was no way for me to consent anybody for the J&Js that I was giving or any other vaccine. And the vaccine cards from a lot of my patients said the expiration date was 12/31 of 2069. That's impossible for a biologic to have a 47-year shelf life, okay? And when they recalled the vaccines, they actually recalled first the Pfizer and the Moderna and said that the emergency use authorization was gone, but they also said to get rid of any of the J&J too, that it was expired. But on our packages from J&J, if you scan the barcode, it said the expiration date was 12/31 of 2069. Now that's impossible. That is impossible. So what are they doing? How can these agents, these biologics and these vaccines have a 47-year shelf life?
What else did you discover as you were going through this journey? And one of the things that we were very greatly concerned about, I mean, you're a doctor, and if you're going to get a shot, then you want to go to someone who knows what they're doing. But we were seeing people going on a couple of day courses, college students going to drive-thrus, jabbing people in their cars. Talk to us about when you got your J&J shots in, you know, how you kept them before you administered them, and how so much of it was human error as well,
right,
from kids.
Well, the J&J was different in that it didn't have to be stored as closely temperature controlled as mRNAs. Those were supposed to be kept very, very cold. I couldn't even get a freezer cold enough to keep them. So for them to have them out in these parking lots and sitting out in the sun, not getting stirred up, not getting reconstituted appropriately, not doing the needle withdrawal, you know, the drawback to see if they were intravascular or not. There were a lot of errors that definitely happened with the administration, but these compounds were never safe anyways. The variability between the lot numbers is just amazing. No vaccine with this track record would have ever gotten through GMP. Okay, it's just that good manufacturing protocol policies have not been followed at all. And all of this has come out now. All of this.
What else have you learned? What else can you tell the people?
So in addition to it causing, I mean, all of the military data, which showed an increase of all types of cancers, 2,000% increase in hypertension, neurologic disorders, psychiatric disturbances are up in the thousands of a percent increase. Okay, we've got cancers, GI cancers, 477% increase in the GI malignancies. But anybody that has gotten these shots most likely has had some heart damage, and a lot of people don't know. So I'm seeing a lot of atrial fibrillation. The myocarditis and pericarditis that they talk about and admit as being an issue, that's a high incidence of about 5 to 7% per shot. So you can lose that much cardiac function with each vaccination. So there are people that have lost, 15, 20% of their cardiac function. So I see this every day where people are going in having atrial fibrillation, which they didn't have before. If they did have it, now it's difficult to control. I just had a patient recently, sadly, she passed away, 5 COVID shots. And she would tell me every time, I know you're passionate about these vaccines not being good, but she'd keep getting them anyways. And her AFib became difficult to control. She was on multiple blood thinners, at least 3 anticoagulants, including full dose Eliquis, Playtel. She was on aspirin, fish oil. She ended up feeling worse, and we were going to put a pacemaker in her, and she couldn't make it to the pacemaker implant date. I put her in the hospital. She died. I did a postmortem. I got a postmortem done, and she had a 7 by 4.5 centimeter thrombus, blood clot in her heart. She shouldn't have been able to make a clot on all those blood thinners, but there's a reason these shots, these mRNA shots, are called clot shots. They're causing atypical, like an amyloid myofibrin clot formation that is not dissolved and not prevented by any of our standard blood thinning and anticoagulant medications.
But yet still people are lining up for them. Not as many, I understand that, we can see that, but still there are those that are blindly lining up.
This is the U.S. Anti-Propaganda Act. I believe Obama repealed that. Okay, so when we've got propaganda saying safe and effective, protect, don't do it for you, do it for grandma, do it for your kids. People are being brainwashed. People are being guilted into taking these shots that are a bio and techno weapon. According to our Surgeon General in Florida, Dr. Ladapo, has said these are bio and techno weapons, and I'm so happy to have DeSantis and Ladapo who know what's going on, and a lot of the other states are coming along as well.
So when you see this bus with the names, and we're only a few months into this tour, every single shot, there has been an injury or a death. So we cannot say that there is a safe and effective vaccine. We can't say that here at Children's Health Defence because of what we're seeing, the people reporting. And we know that these new shots are coming out with mRNA. They are testing them now. They're on the market. The flu shots on the market being tested on the military. Do you think we just have to just stop, as a doctor, stop this whole vaccine protocol because it's not working?
Absolutely, we have to. I mean, they just passed in Japan a self-assembling mRNA vaccine, which scares me to death. You use less of the mRNA, but it self-assembles. It gets into your DNA. They tell you it gets into your DNA. We are messing with Mother Nature in a bad way. So this is the worst thing we could be doing, and I can't believe that they are getting away with it. I mean, this is just...
And what about shedding? We're getting so many reports of people...
I was shed upon by my mother. So my mother, I was having to bathe her, toilet her, wash her face, clean her, literally. She couldn't do anything after her second shot. And within a week or so of her being around me that much, living with me, I was having daily headaches. I was fatigued. I thought I was just depressed. And I started having my period, which I hadn't had in 5 years. And my doctor, Dr. Christian Northrup, said, what part of vaccine shedding don't you understand? Or spike protein toxicity, don't you understand? And I thought, oh my goodness, you're exactly right. So
shedding is real.
Yes, it's real, and I've checked my own antibodies. So I am unvaccinated. I have had COVID. I've got natural immunity. My husband and I got COVID at the same time. His antibody level is 50, and I see patients that are COVID vaccinated every single day, and my level is 8,500 for spike protein IgG. So that's an assay, that's a surrogate assay to look for perhaps the amount of spike protein that one is being exposed to, or the amount of antibodies that are being shed. And initially, I didn't think that antibodies were bad to be passively transferred, but as Dr. Brian Hooker has pointed out to me, that's what's causing a lot of the autoimmunity. I'm seeing a ton of more autoimmune issues, rashes and reactions, musculoskeletal issues, connective tissue disorders, all kinds of things. So it
has to stop.
Yes.
Because we're killing our brothers and sisters.
It has to stop.
Bloody
people just need to say no. We need to have bodily autonomy. We need to have health and freedom in our choices.
Is there anything else you would like to say? Because I know that you have to go and do a very important event today.
Yes. I just thank you all, Children's Health Defense, for everything that you're doing, because these people cannot die in vain. I have lost too many patients, too many of my patients that have died, patients' family members that have been harmed beyond belief. A lot of them are so demented now that they do not even understand what happened to them. A 50 to 80% increase in dementia in the past 2 to 3 years since the vaccine rollout. And this is due to the amyloid being deposited in the brains and a Parkinsonian picture that occurs. I've got 7 cases of supranuclear palsy that occurred after the vaccines. I had never seen a case in 30 years. Okay, I've got the brain scans to show it.
And infertility through the roof?
Yes, fertility rates are down, so infertility's up, but fetal demise, miscarriages, very high. And that Jim Thorpe and Dr. Kim Biss and Dr. Sullivan locally have all commented about this.
Okay. Thank you so much for your advice, your wisdom, and for coming on the bus.
Thank you so much.
Some 40 to 70% of mothers who have children with autism believe that their child was injured by a vaccine. We should be listening to these mothers. We will perform the studies that should have been performed 25 years ago.
This is the most important thing. There's nothing more important than that.
This guy is staking his presidency on ending the autism epidemic, and he talked about vaccines.
We want no mercury in the vaccine. We want no aluminum in the vaccine.
We didn't know if he was actually going to touch on vaccines, and he was all over it.
There's no reason to give a baby that's almost just born hepatitis B.
He basically gave parents permission not to vaccinate their kids, and definitely not to take Tylenol.
We now have data we cannot ignore. There is a causal relationship between prenatal acetaminophen use and neurodevelopmental disorders of ADHD and autism spectrum disorder.
The truth is, vaccine injuries are real and they've been ignored.
Society does not want to acknowledge vaccine injury, period.
These childhood vaccinations, the people of America are telling us they are not safe and effective. We are seriously concerned at Children's Health Defense about the disinformation and misinformation out there.
The government has decided that this particular industry doesn't have to be liable to anybody.
There's only 10% of children are complying with the CDC's recommendation on COVID boosters.
A record number of kindergartners didn't get at least one state-mandated vaccine.
And the number of exemptions is up. Vaccination rates in children start to drop once again.
A 16-year-old girl wins in court after the public school system denied her medical vaccine exemption.
The nonprofit Children's Health Defense has championed her case.
Sarah Joe is going to be going.
Health and Human Services is reestablishing the task force on safer childhood vaccines. This comes after a lawsuit from an advocacy group formerly led by HHS Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr.